Hey everybody, and welcome to Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from the Straight. Today we're going to go through a range of topics. First of all, we're going to talk about racing's funding model and some annual reports data that's come out this week, which, yeah, puts forward some interesting questions about where racing sits. We've got the Melbourne Cup numbers. What's going on there? We've had some positive results in the broadcast space. What does that say for the great race moving forward? The Magic Millions catalogue is out. Tim will have some insight into that and what to expect from that bumper catalogue from Magic Millions. And finally, the mare sales and I guess Yulong's dominance of that market as well. Tim, we'll kick off with the annual report. Interesting time in the for the PRAs, I suppose. It's annual report season. The results of last year are all coming out. We had Racing New South Wales come out last week with a modest surplus. Racing South Australia had a surplus but are predicting a deficit. Racing Victoria's numbers have come out. They're probably going to be down. Well, they will be down $11.8 million for last year and trying to plot a way back for this year. It's an interesting time for the industry more broadly, Tim. I guess as wagering numbers have moderated, it certainly created a fair share of challenges for these regulators, I suppose, in order to try to make the numbers add up, to cut their cloth accordingly when it comes to things like prize money and other costs of their business to try to make this work. I mean, what do you make of it? What do you make of where the industry sits at the moment, Tim?
Well, obviously, during those COVID highs and they had all this money to splash around and different PRAs did it different ways, but obviously prize money was the big benefit of that to the owners and trainers and jockeys and so forth. But we've come back off that and we've seen that for the last couple of years and the turnover's continuing to decline or revenues. Well, that's the interesting thing. Bren, some have lost money like Racing Victoria, but turnover actually went up from what I can read.
Well, revenue went up, turnover went down, but revenue's gone up. Yeah, so it's an interesting one. I guess it depends on how you report it. And I guess on the other side of that, Tim, is we can have a look at the numbers from the WSPs, from the bookmakers. And like if you look at Sportsbet's numbers, which have come through Flutter, their parent company today, again, we're seeing the case that turnover is going down and continues to go down. It was probably 10%, 12% last year, and probably 10 to 12% again this year. The first quarter of this year, it's been down. However, the revenue back to the bookmakers is actually more positive than what it was because the way that they conduct their business has changed. So what we're seeing fewer and fewer incentives, I suppose, fewer bonus bets and deposit matches and these things. So less marketing spend, but a higher margin business. Now that is a positive for the WSPs and probably a positive for the PRAs because it looks like for the sake of Racing Victoria, as you mentioned before, turnover went down, but their overall return sort of was actually more in a positive number. The question is, Tim, what does this mean for punters? Is the fact that if they're getting effectively spending less money but giving away less money, what does that say for the sustainability of a model which is focused highly on yield, which obviously means getting more money day to day out of the everyday punters? The number of punters is growing, so that probably helps to a certain extent, but there probably must be some concerns about how sustainable a model is based on effectively creating greater margins out of the punting dollar.
Well, if you increase the margins, which is the takeout rates, I guess, or percentages, punters will lose their money faster. Then do they get less enjoyment from their recreational punting dollar on a Saturday or 7 days a week in some cases? There's a fine balance there, and we've spoken about it before. There's a fine balance of obviously generating revenue and for the PRAs to allow racing to continue and thrive and encourage ownership bases, as opposed to also providing enough return to the punter. And there's that fine balance. With Racing Victoria have met with WSPs about refining the charges, I guess, that they impose. It'd be interesting the next 12 months to reassess where the incomes come from to PRAs, which I took out of the Racing SA report. Was interesting that their wagering revenue grew 4.7%, but the income from the tab was down 1.4 million or 5.9%. So does that tab losing market share just in South Australia or across the board? Obviously a new CEO with Gil McLaughlin. And so, an interesting 12 months ahead for the industry, for wagering service providers as well.
Yeah, and tabs are the really interesting one because they're the ones that are in transition. So first of all, it's the end of their joint venture in Victoria. So that ended the start of this year, so it started this financial year, so that's all over for there. So, but in New South Wales, their deal's under review, I suppose you would say. The government are going to have to look through that and try to work through what it looks like in terms of moving forward. And you would suggest that it's highly likely that New South Wales will move to a model that's more akin to Queensland or Victoria. That could also result in a jump in the point of consumption tax, which I don't think any of the racing bodies want that, because they see that as a net negative for racing, that despite the fact that they're more reliant on funding for point of consumption tax, that we've probably reached the threshold, the tipping point now where that sits. South Australia is an interesting one. South Australia's the other one's been highlighted by Tabcorp across the years as a concerning place for them, a place where they struggle a bit with their business, and recording impairments against the South Australian and New South Wales business has been part of their accounting over the last couple of years. So I think with the tab will be most fascinating. There's two ways the tab can go either. Obviously, it's changing the way that it connects to the racing industry, the way that funding's done away from the joint venture model, because obviously the pari-mutuel model is fading away. We've seen that in terms of its importance. But also, how it redefines itself in a world where they're trying to seek a level playing field. They've been talking about this level playing field for tab for years now. If they achieve this level playing field, then there's no excuses anymore. They need to be able to compete with the sports bet, the Ladbrokes, the emerging powers. Like we've seen Bluebet, which is now BetR, come out and put out a strong ambition this week. They want to get to 10% market share. PointsBet are another one that are growing primarily a lot in the sports market, I suppose. But if you look at, it's a very competitive market at the moment. The other thing is, and it was a point well made in the Flutter investor presentation today, was that those big boys are best placed to weather the regulatory, I guess, storm or headaches coming, whether it be through advertising, taxation, and all those things. So scale does help in their situation. So tab should be in a much better position than it probably is, but also should be in a much better position than a lot of the smaller players moving forward. So that they need to reverse their fortunes, and again, does rise in the fortunes of the WSPs, is that good for the PRAs? Well, yes, maybe, but I guess in a dominant position, particularly if they're, I guess it's just one last point of this, particularly if a lot of these bodies are moving a lot of these WSPs are moving their business more towards sport. And it comes back to that quintessential battle of sports and racing. Sport is taking more market share. Obviously that's okay in some places in Australia, because obviously for race fields it's not, but the point of consumption tax from sport still goes back to racing, so it's a net positive. People who bet on sport do tend to bet on racing or come into racing, which is fine. But it's a very unpredictable wagering landscape at the moment, and you wouldn't want to try to be an accountant at one of these big PRAs trying to work out where the money's coming in and where the money's coming out, because it's highly unpredictable, Tim.
The other interesting thing, just the Australian Turf Club put out their annual report as well, and recorded a $2.4 million loss. And obviously there's a board election coming up as well next week or the week after. So as we know, all timed with the proposed sale of Rose Hill. So really interesting times for the ATC.
Yeah, and their challenge goes back to the tab thing. The tab funding in New South Wales goes through to the clubs. And I think it's in that Warwick's report, I think it's gone from $89 million at its height 3 years ago to $72 million this year. So that's a significant drop for the ATC. Now, Racing New South Wales has stepped in with a $10 million contribution to that. But it's interesting how it's played out in that situation, Tim. We're seeing that the real life, I guess, impacts of the decline of the DAT-TEB revenue and what it means to New South Wales clubs.
Well, my understanding is that there's floor prices or floor revenue, I guess, and that's where Racing New South Wales are topping up ATC, but also country clubs, and so that's reached that floor price, for want of a better term, and so some clubs are actually doing quite well out of Racing New South Wales topping them up under their agreements. But how sustainable that is, as Peter McGoran, the ATC chairman, makes that point in the report, that you can't rely on Racing New South Wales handouts necessarily longer term, particularly under the current regime. Whether that changes the regulatory way the money's distributed in the future, who knows? But at the moment, they're topped up by the regulator, Racing New South Wales.
Yeah, exactly right. We saw this year that Racing New South Wales did not put any money aside as part of their prize money provisioning, and that's the first time that's happened in a couple of years. So interesting one around that. I guess with some positive news around about the engagement in racing, and there was some really positive numbers come out of the first year of the Channel 9 or the Nine Networks deal with the VRC over the Melbourne Cup Carnival. Tim, I mean, you probably saw more of the coverage than I did, but certainly the feedback that I've got's been quite positive, and there's the numbers are showing that. I think a 30% rise and some really good numbers across the board.
Yeah, I thought it was, I consumed it as a punter and consumer, and I've got no complaints. I'm sure, there's always criticism and things could be done better or personalities that certain people don't like, but I thought it was, on the whole, very good. I was able to watch the mounting yard, post-race interviews, watch the race, and it wasn't, they changed the angles slightly, I think, I don't know, but it wasn't to the detriment of watching the race. You always knew where your horse was. I thought they did a good job first year round. They didn't, again, my understanding is with Tabcorp being behind and the VRC behind the agreement, it's not as if they could go and grab every personality or ex-jockey or trainer to help them or be on-air talent. So, they picked who they did, and I thought they did a very good job. Billy Slater on horseback and, the Tabcorp sort of guys, Grace Ramage and David Gately and hosted by Eddie. I thought it was fine.
Yeah, and I think Channel 9 are good at these big events. I mean, with respect to Channel 10, it's not in their DNA to host these big sporting events, as meant for a long time. Channel 9 are very good at making it look better, and I guess the visual presentation, the different camera angles, all that type of stuff. It's not necessarily for the dyed-in-the-wool punter, but the dyed-in-the-wool punters, such as you and me, can probably get our experience elsewhere, albeit that the racing.com experience was diminished due to the fact that they weren't on track much, I suppose. They had a couple of people on track, but it wasn't quite the same feel, but that's okay. I think the numbers do show with that uptick in overall audience and all those types of things that people responded well to it. And it certainly goes in the right direction. I think probably overall there was a much more positive vibe. It was something Aaron Morrison alluded to in the annual report. There was a good positive vibe over the Spring Carnival, particularly the Melbourne Cup Carnival, racing sort of back in a good space. And yeah, it seemed to have worked out pretty well for them. So I think shooting forward, the challenge is now to back it up year after year, continue to improve the coverage, continue to, I guess, what's the word I'm looking for? Engage, more and more people. Yeah. I think the dangerous thing is if you start skipping between networks all the time, you end up with an inconsistent experience, and that can be dangerous in terms of overall long-term engagement.
But
all right, move on. Go on,
Tim. Sorry, I just want to say Flemington attracted 285,000 people to the races in 4 days. That's one of them was a work day. That's a big effort. And I've said it before, racing is a great television sport because it's accessed on your phone easily. You can tune in for that 2 minutes, then you can go about your day. You can stay at work. You can do whatever, do things with your family and still consume those races that you're interested in. So in that regard, racing's got a lot going for it as opposed to, say, the Test cricket, which I love, but, you're stuck there all day if you want to watch it.
We'll move on now, Tim, to the Magic Millions catalogue, which was released earlier this week. The first yearling sale of the 2025 season. It's hard to believe we're saying 2025. Yeah, obviously it sets the benchmark or sets the mark for how the year's gonna roll on, Tim. I mean, you 1,401 horses, a little bit less than last year, but still a lot of horses. High on quality, plenty of good, beachy pedigrees to get ourselves involved and looked excited about. I mean, how have you, at this far out, we're a couple of months out, but how have you sort of, viewed the launch and what we've seen and the expectation around this sale?
Well, it's such an important sale for the whole industry across Australasia, and we'll have international Northern Hemisphere interest as well. But just the pedigrees, the advantage Magic Millions has by going first, or it's expensive to breed a horse, to run a fund. A lot of breeders like that opportunity to sell a horse in January, get paid soon after, help with cash flow. You do need the right sort of horse to go there, otherwise you'll get punished by the market. The market is ruthless. Seems to be more and more top heavy, where the middle market and certainly the top, where those uber wealthy investors, they're immune to economic, rate hikes and different things like that. So, but from what I can see on paper, the Magic Millions team's done a great job. Have they taken market share? Possibly not. If you talk to Inglis, I'm sure they'd argue that, they've eased to their their main sales is probably spread out across 2 and 3 sales with English Classic, certainly Premier and Easter, which, in April, that's, it's marketed as best of the best, but everyone has an important place in the calendar, and Magic Millions in January is certainly one of them.
Yeah, and they'd be happy with the fact they've got a Melbourne Cup winner out of there. We could have bought Knight's Choice 3 years ago. We were there, Tim. We don't remember the horse per se, but it's $85,000. So there's opportunities at all ends of the market. But it does seem like Magic Millions have been determined to sort of take a strong share of that market early in the year, capitalise on that, I guess, that FOMO feeling of not wanting to miss out on a horse and create that experience. And a bit of a shift up in the format this year, Tim, as well. Of course, no Saturday night session. The book one's condensed across 4 days. There's a 2-day book 2, but sort of half of book 2's now sort of the back end of Sunday. So a few things have switched around, I guess. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that Friday session goes, because it could be a bit of a monster. We hear of these monster long, sort of 12-hour long sessions in the UK and the US, but we don't do that many of them in Australia. It'd be interesting to see how that goes on that Friday, because it's going to be a long day in the Queensland heat, selling a lot of horses.
Well, it is. Not everyone's agreed with it, but personally, I think it's the right decision. Saturday night can be if you're selling, sometimes it's brilliant, sometimes it's not. It's a long day of the races for then trainers and syndicators and owners to then get back there on Saturday night and try and go about their business. So some just said flatly, I'll ignore Saturday night, I'll do my shopping in the first few days. And because of that, some of the vendors if they were catalogued late on the Saturday night, they'd take their horses out and send them to an English sale or an alternative sale. So by having Friday, I think that keeps the buyers there. Yes, it'll be a long day, but hospitality is pretty good in that centre area. We only sort of get to go in there and shove a microphone in front of a buyer and then get that again, but it looks pretty good. And it'll be fine. And on paper, at least, it'll be a bumper finish. There's already a huge talk about the Home Affairs filly out of Sunlight. Home Affairs, big stallion for Coolmore, sort of pretty much launched their Colts fund, hasn't it? Now they've got Switzerland and Storm Boy, although they bought Storm Boy, Shinzo, the slipper winner. So, that was a catalyst. If maybe Home Affairs didn't come along, maybe that wouldn't have been as strong. But now they're just, he was uber popular first season, and he's got 63, I think, or 64 yearlings at the Gold Coast. So there'll be plenty of opportunities for those that were fans of the Home Affairs.
Yeah, there's always a bunch of stallions. We spoke about before, the big vendors. They send lots of horses there, don't they, Tim? They're really keen to get their best horses out there first and foremost, first to market. It is an interesting time of year. There's a real buzz of expectation about the year, people returning into the new year. It's been a fabulous success, this sale, over the years, and I guess it'd be interesting. And they have changed format before. It's not the first time they haven't pivoted. If you're selling to a market, that's as up and down, I suppose, as the bloodstock market, you've got to meet it in different ways. And so, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. Sort of off the back of that, I thought what was interesting too is that, just expectations of the market, Tim. I would think, you said before, you would think the top end would be strong. I would think that the market was fairly realistic, especially towards the back end of the 2024 yearling season. With that in mind, you would think that it'd be the market would be strong without being sort of a bubble in 2025. Hard to see that's going to bounce back massively, but I also think that both buyers and sellers are fairly realistic about where it sits.
Definitely. And 2024 was hardly a bad year. Yes, it was tougher, and there was maybe some blood on the floor, for want of a better of a term, but some of the sales, but still, by and large, there's still a lot of money traded. It's a healthy bloodstock market. Australia's sort of set the tone, which has sort of flowed through to Northern Hemisphere at the moment, Tattersalls in UK, and we've just seen with the mare's sales in the US and Keeneland in September. Those uber wealthy, investors just want to be involved in racing, including in Australia. So, the top end will be no issue, and probably Magic Millions and maybe English Easter, and the top percentile and will be protected. It's those other sales that will find it tougher, but vendors are realistic. They're hardy. They've been through it before. And they'll, find homes for their horses and sell them and move on.
Yeah, I think we had the fewest amount of Yulong sold across all the sales in Australia than we had for about 11 years. And I think that was just the market basically saying that they had their fill. I think traders in particular are probably much more cautious in what they'll buy, and so that probably will see that sort of middle to lower end market probably still battling to get them away. But again, there's not the sense that the market has been a bubble. It was probably a bubble a couple of years ago, to be fair, and we're probably back to for some fairly realistic targets. And the sales companies work very hard to bring new investors into the market, and it's amazing how things can change. I suppose 5 or 6 years ago, people were sort of scoffing at what Yulong were trying to do and trying to come into the Australian market. I remember they imported a whole bunch of Galileos from Aiden O'Brien stable, and people were going, what are they doing? What are they trying to do here? I tell you what they've been able to do in the last 2 or 3 years in terms of not just a broodmare investment, but we're now seeing the effects on the track that, BS16 comes out, Tres the Moment wins, and they had, I think, 4 winners in their colours on Melbourne Cup week. The direction of that organisation is massive, and we saw again last week. We saw the private sale of Magic Time. We don't know what they paid for it, but you got to think it's got a 2 or a 3 in front of it. Tim is a dual Group 1 winner. So Mr. Zhang's relentless pursuit for the best bloodstock in the world, and particularly in Australia, it shows no sign of ceasing, does it?
Well, I think he saw. Funny you mentioned Coolmore. I think he saw dominance of Coolmore around the world. He thought, how do I do that? And that's by acquiring a lot of the best mares. And then success not guaranteed, but it should follow, particularly with this scale and the number of mares they've got. You just can't but not breed good horses. And on top of that, it appears a lot of their younger stallions are going well. Alabama Express, Purata, and Lucky Vega even had his first crop. 2-year-olds had 2 winners, I think, and a stakes winner the other day in the English Spanner race for Bjorn Baker. So, there's a lot happening. And with Written Tycoon, yes, in his twilight years, but churning out winner after winner and really good horses.
More Cup week winners than any other sire. He's travelling really well, and I guess this is the first crop of 2-year-olds out of that Yulong crew that sort of come through from Written Tycoon. So we're bound to see bounce in those results as well, given the quality of mares they were supported by. I mean, it's you can foresee that in 3 or 4 years' time, those green colours are just going to be everywhere, aren't they? They're going to be completely dominant. I mean, they're already getting to that point where they're performing and they're turning up in the best races, and we're seeing some really good horses. But you can only think that they will have, the best colts, the best fillies, the best older horses. He's shown a willingness to race horses on, because I don't think there was that pressure there of returning that investment straight away. It's just hard to see how he's not going to be a dominant force for at least the next decade.
Definitely, but at the same time, he's also seen to be selling, so there's going to be opportunities for buyers there. He's not going to keep every horse. A lot of horses are going to all the sales. Probably a logistical nightmare for Vin Cox and Sam Fairgrave and the team trying to work out where all these young horses go. But they will be selling them, and we've already seen that this year. That sold some a lovely Written Tycoon filly. He sold it for 200,000, then sort of maybe not buyer's regret, but bought it back for $1 million just because, he wants good horses and prepared to pay for them.
Yeah, quite amazing. And just sort of going back to the Magic Time thing before, it was interesting. You wrote an article in the week about the private mares market, and we don't see many of these private sales anymore in these mares, but obviously digital sales have changed the way that mares are traded. You don't have to wait until the traditional broodmare sales in sort of April, May, June to sort of sell these horses off or turn these horses over. But for these top-end mares, we probably see them more than others, I suppose, but we probably only see maybe 2 or 3 a year at that prominent level. We saw Pool and Gatter last year. There was a couple of Yulong last year as well, but this year we've seen Magic Time. I mean, you spoke to the guys, the agents that sort of facilitate this market. I mean, I guess my question to you is, why would you sell privately if you would think most of the time you're going to do better at a public auction?
Well, that's an interesting. I spoke to Will Johnson about that, and he actually mentioned that there was a horse sold online, and this is no criticism of Inglis or anyone like that he said if they were sold privately, would have made more money. It's just the agents, have had to adapt their businesses, and that's fine. And the whole, punters have had to adapt the way they do form. What worked 20 years ago doesn't work now with sectionals and different data and whatever. And bloodstock agents and the private market has changed, but also there is still horses being traded behind the scenes. And the reasons for that, competition, I guess, maybe like a Magic Time. Mr. Zhang's prepared to buy this now before maybe John Muir put the mare through Gold Coast next year and he gets knocked out by Coolmore, for instance, or a Katsumi Yoshida. You know, they can't buy everything. So he obviously put a very solid effort.
They can buy everything, and they pretty much have over the last couple of years. I guess
that's true.
If Yulong are buying it anyway, I mean, I guess it is an interesting one. We probably assume that, you know, she might have a 3 in front of her, and Coolangatta, who was sold to Coolmore last year, probably had a 4 in front of her. There's a gap now between now and those big. You can sell them online, and there is an opportunity to get that good results online. But there is a gap until the breeding sales, and this time of year is probably the time those deals get done, rather than wait for a couple of months for them to go through those big, we get those big results like we got with Imperatriz and stuff last year at a public auction level. So that's probably the difference, isn't it? But I still think that in your heart of hearts, you must be thinking it'd probably do better with two. If you've got Yulong and Coolmore, or Yulong and Katsumi, or Arrowfield, or one of the other big mare players on them, they're pretty much going to fight for them most of the time, and they're rare enough that they will bid up on them. So it's hard to believe you wouldn't do better. But I think that this deal was done in a hurry as well, and we are 6 months out from the mare season, aren't we? So mare sale season.
Yeah, they're not machines. They're horses. Things can go wrong, you know. And obviously, hopefully, Magic Time is all well, but you know, she could get injured next week, and you know, so these things change all the time. Money in their hand. You know, John Neal was able to then, you know, I think he spent $1 million in the US on horses. So, you know, there's always reinvestment going on. And privately, if you are a trader, keeping what you paid for that horse, you know, can be when you go to sell them, can be really important, because when it's the public information, and we're all for transparency, but, you know, just people do use those public prices, pinhook prices and whatever to help value their horses. So, just one of those things that some people still prefer to do business that way.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say about Yulong and Mr. Zhang is that with these mares, he does like to buy them when they've got more to show on the track. You know, we saw that with Vestastina. Obviously, we've seen that with a few others which he's bought who have come back and won good races later on. And it gives them a chance to show that. Some of them haven't worked out, but he knows that probably if they come back and they run a couple of races and they're probably not up scratch, they're not going to lose that much value. They've still got that value. And I guess that's the advantage that, you know, Magic Time can now be set for some good races throughout the Sydney Autumn, and then work out what they want to do with her again. But, you know, it looks like with Via Sistina, for example, they've got to keep on racing her. There's no desire or rush to get her off stud. Now, she's effectively a $5 million mare. She's worth a lot from a broodmare perspective, but she can win a lot of prize money in Australia and probably a fair bit of money overseas if she's the way she's going. So I guess that's the confidence that they're seeing at the moment in that market. Yeah, I'll give Mr. Shang his credit. He's willing to race them, which is something that, you know, some of the other breeders haven't done over the years, but he wants to see them out in the track.
Well, it'll be interesting what they do with Via Sistina, whether they do take her to Europe next year. And I was only thinking then, you know, keeping her over there and serving it to Southern Hemisphere time to one of the leading stallions over there, or even Northern Hemisphere time. He's got Broodmare Bend and interests up there as well. Obviously, Lucky Vega shuttles and stands up there as well. So plenty of options for Mr. Zhang.
He could sell her again. What would she be worth now, do you think, Tim?
Would she be worth that much more? Probably. The way these things, these mares, the way I look at it, once they've won one or two Group 1s, they're probably worth what they are, except for maybe the Via Sistina and Imperatrizes that are completely unique. Yeah, maybe
what would Coolmore pay for a Fastnet Rock mare who's won a Cox Plate by athletes? I'm not saying they'd sell her, but it is an interesting little hypothetical.
Well, they paid $4 million for Avantage. They might pay $8 million, would they?
Yeah, you've got to reckon, like the way that she won. I mean, she's priceless. She won't get sold, so I'm not saying she will, but it is a nice, interesting little question nonetheless. I think
she was re-offered in the Northern Hemisphere, even though some pundits are dissing Australian racing. I'd say she makes, closer to the equivalent of 10 maybe.
Yeah, and she's got that Fastnet Galileo cross, and it's hard to believe that she would be worth a lot of money. Thanks for that, Tim. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk this week. We'll be back again next week to talk a whole bunch of stories in the racing, wagering and breeding industry.